New Mutants number 13 is the 7th chapter in X-Men Ten of Swords, exploring Doug and Warlock's preparation for the sword-fighting tournament between Krakoa and Arakko, with Krakoa itself taking an active role in trying to establish Doug's safety. Today I'll answer, is Doug Ramsey, aka Cypher, going to die in the X-Men's Ten of Swords event? Is it time for Doug, Warlock, and Krakoa's secret plan? What do they have in store for the mutants of the Marvel Universe? What does New Mutants add to the Ten of Swords event? And theories and predictions for what's to come in the Dawn of X and, of course, in Ten of Swords. Hey, everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are listening to Krakin and Krakoa number 102. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or podcast, Krakin and Krakoa especially, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. Spoilers for discussed comics may follow. Writer Ed Brisson, artist Rod Reis, letters Travis Lanham. Doug thinks he's going to die. He's worried about it. That's where we open this issue and questions whether, why Saturnyne chose him and Warlock as his sword in the first place. There's a lot of teasing throughout New Mutants number 13 that Doug is not going to make it out of this event, and that's something I'm going to explore pretty heavily today. I would actually say probably the argument most in favor of him making it out of Ten of Swords alive is how heavily it's teased here. that might actually be a misdirect. I do think it's also a good idea to call out Saturnyne's role as dungeon master for these events, everything happening in Ten of Swords, as I've kind of just been taking it for granted that some divine source handed these swords and sword bearers from on high, when actually, seemingly these are decisions that Saturnyne, the ruler of Otherworld, made. This is something I theorized with Open Mike Eagle in our Krakin and Krakoa number 100 live this past weekend, that Doug is one of the most likely to die in Ten of Swords. I scored him a 4 out of 5 on the likely to get it scale. That said, I did put an asterisk on this prediction in that I just don't know that it will mean his death, right? I think there's a change coming for Doug. Does it actually mean his final death, though? Approximately 2/3 of Doug's existence as a character is as the dead New Mutant. This is supposed to be a status quo breaking story across the Hickman era of X-Men, so killing the character that has famously died a lot isn't working that hard against the grain. Here's what we do know. Doug's sword is Warlock. Warlock is on the cover of the post-Ten of Swords New Mutants number 14, and Doug is not. Jumping a bit, Doug is crucially the only mutant on Krakoa who can really communicate with the living island. In Moira's ninth life, there's a walking Krakoa that has bonded with Doug. I think we're going to get some bombshell revelations about Krakoa's plans and about Doug's connections, and we're going to move toward the two of them merging in some way. And the way New Mutants number 13 plays out, with Krakoa really showing more of a protective bond with Doug than I would have guessed, I feel like my theory is more and more likely, honestly. Krakoa is really protective of Doug in this comic book, the two of them bonding in some very, very serious ways, right? Including, Moss Swamp Thing-esque beards, I think is potentially in the cards, to do a little tarot pun for the X of Swords. Remember, too, that Doug, Warlock, and Krakoa are connected in ways we've only seen teased in the pages of back in House of X and Powers of 10, right? When Doug first visits the island with Professor X, there's this moment that I've talked about a lot and I've seen projected and theorized a lot about, where Pepe Larraz doing the art here, I think, if not him, RB Silva, Doug touches Krakoa with his Warlock arm, and the leaves begin to, change shape, right? They start to take on what looks like a techno-organic virus. That's a big deal, right? There's some sort of connective tissue here between these three, but this could be as simple just as they are close and they have bonded very closely. But obviously, me being someone who likes to theorize, and of course the Phalanx playing a major role in Powers of 10, I think this means a heck of a lot more. We just don't know what yet as far as what the story has delivered. So back in New Mutants number 13, Magic gives Doug sword lessons, but really she just whips his butt a lot. She really beats up on Doug. She's trying to prepare him for this tournament. This really lets Rod Reis go his full Bill Sienkiewicz, Claremont Sienkiewicz era New Mutants in terms of action, which is awesome. I think having Reis on this book is a huge win for New Mutants fans everywhere. This does also answer many readers' questions about what Magic's been doing in Ten of Swords. She got, because she has her sword immediately, she's kind of just appeared to be just sitting in that Ready Player One circle and waiting for the other sword bearers to show up. So I do like to see longtime New Mutants family, as Ileana calls Doug, expressing this kind of tough love in their relationship as they work together, whatever the outcome might be. On the other side of, tough love and family, Krakoa worries that if Doug is in the tournament and dies, Krakoa will lose his translator and effectively his voice for the mutant nation of Krakoa. Krakoa goes so far as to take over Mondo to tell Doug face to face that he could hide Doug in a Krakoan exile until this passes. Definitely getting visions of, I don't know about a no place there, because I think those are even secret to Krakoa, but definitely like where Sabretooth is exiled, maybe there's another pit that Krakoa is thinking about hiding Doug in. I kind of glossed over this in Hellions, the chapter that came right before this, but it is kind of wild how Professor X in particular is trying to weasel his way out of this tournament to the death. I mean, the Quiet Council is doing it as a whole. It's totally in character for Professor to want to protect his increasingly creepy use of the word children, but it's also so very clear the fight is going to happen. Like, Sinister's plan is to steal the ball and hope nobody else has another one. And Krakoa's plan for Doug is to hide him in a closet. These aren't super advanced schemes that aren't just immediately going to get ignored so the game can go on. Exodus, he's got a plan of his own. He kindly suggests that killing Doug now would keep him out of the tournament since resurrections are on hold, and allow another suitable sword bearer, if Exodus seems to think he's that guy, to take his place. Again, to this, I would argue Exodus has some faulty logic, which is a shock coming from a guy who was Team Crusades, in that, as Doug points out, Saturnyne could just say, "No, Doug, no problem, you're just down a sword bearer, now you have to go through this down a fighter." Exodus has no faith as well here that Sinister's plan in Hellions will work, which I have to think is a good call. I am definitely enjoying the embittered relationship between Sinister and Exodus as they get in each other's plumage all too often, as we saw back in Hellions number 5. But again, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that with one more Hellions issue, number 6 is going to be a chapter. I think it's like chapter 18 in Ten of Swords. They're probably not going to find too many swords and disrupt the proceedings to the point that the tournament doesn't happen. It's worth calling out here, too, that one of the bigger questions throughout the Dawn of X is, again, why is Doug hiding Warlock? Remember back in Giant Size Nightcrawler, Doug made Illyana promise not to tell anyone Warlock was around. This seemed like a big deal at the time. The Warlock sword page data the data page acknowledges this, saying it has not been revealed why both Douglas and Warlock were hiding his existence to the Krakoan community. So clearly this is a secret that is intentional. I mean, it would be very disappointing if this was all literally for nothing, and I kind of doubt that. You know, there's a reason Doug didn't want people to know Warlock was there, although now that Warlock is around and is going to be Doug's sword, and more people have seen Doug and Warlock together, like, clearly Warlock is on the island, I think. You know, everybody on Krakoa should be aware of this information at this point. So the secret can't really just be like, well, I didn't want you to know because maybe he's not technically a mutant or wouldn't have been allowed or something like that, you know, where it would have been just an excuse to get Warlock on the island. There has to be a lot more to it in terms of, again, what they're doing together in terms of spreading the techno-organic virus throughout Krakoa. There's a bigger seed there. I just don't know what it is. Towards the end of Doug and Magic's training session, Doug reads her body language, although the implication is this is as a result of fighting with her so many times. It reminds me of Resurrected Doug back in the Necrotia event in X-Men history, who was actually an extremely effective fighter because of his ability to read people in battle. It'd be cool to see those muscles flexed again, although the implication by the end of New Mutants number 13, as this is highly unlikely, and Doug remains outgunned, outmanned, he's going to need a right-hand man to get through this tournament. But again, like, if you want to see Doug as kind of a really cool fighter, which obviously, like, that is his history, is he's got this mutant ability that is not suited for action. Check out the Necrotia event, because he does come back, you know, mildly evil and resurrected by Selene, but he also, I think, takes on, like, the entire New Mutants lineup at that time. So although there's no more New Mutants chapters in Ten of Swords coming up, Doug is featured on the cover of Excalibur chapter 15, which certainly teases that he is going to have to fight. I think very little surprise there. Again, I think in this fight, like, we can't expect anything about this to go traditionally. If it's literally just a sword fight, like, there's no way Doug wins this thing, you know? It's just, it wouldn't make a heck of a lot of sense. So there has to be a lot more to it. Now, the theories I have here are that I think one possibility is Krakoa finds a way to, like, sneak into this battle and protect Doug. That, like, somehow Krakoa extends itself to get to this fight and protect Doug. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but, you know, we've seen Arakko, like, the Arakko point bonded with Krakoa. This led to a number of confusion, I think, among readers, where they're like, wait, weren't Krakoa and Arakko bonded already in the Hickman-written X-Men number 2? How is Arakko actually in this Amenth dimension? I think that's probably just, like, a piece of Arakko, like a part. That's my interpretation of that. What if Krakoa can do something similar, or inhabit Mondo and have him come save the day, right? Something where Krakoa is reaching out and protecting Doug so that they can bond together. I mean, the other thing here too is, if Doug, Warlock, and Krakoa have some massive plan involving the coming of the Phalanx or protective techno-organic virus or whatever the heck it is, you kind of have to enact that now, right? With like death right on the doorstep, this final death especially of Otherworld, it becomes a time where you really have to push on what you think that plan might have been. So I'm curious to see that get developed maybe in that Excalibur issue as well. Elsewhere in the issue, we do get a nice early coded sequence between Captain Commander Cyclops and Captain Magic, in which they clearly exchange some sort of secret message between the two. I don't know exactly what it is, but obviously they have some Captain protocols, which is something we haven't dug into much at all. I mean, we've gotten some data pages about who the captains are and what their roles are, and we saw Cyclops and Gorgon go into that United Nations meeting back in X-Men number 4, but seeing Cyclops and Magic actually directly interact and actually like planning something specific is definitely of interest to me. I'd like to see these characters interacting a heck of a lot more. I'll call out here as well, this is the final issue Ed Brisson writes before Vita Ayala and Rod Reis will take on the title post Ten of Swords in New Mutants number 14. Brisson's run definitely had an odder kickoff than any other X series, with 4 of the first 8 issues by Hickman and Rod Reis telling a totally separate story from the one Brisson's been telling. I don't want to say he was set up to fail, because the storylines his run does hone in on are still among my least favorites, but oddly enough, the last 2 issues are his best work. And I think this Ten of Swords issue, when he really gets to integrate fully with the center of the Dawn of X, the stories that really matter, it's quite solid. I'm extremely excited for Vita Ayala and again, the artist, the creative team taking over. But again, credit where it's due that Brisson went out on a very strong note. I think this run could have gotten a lot better if given the time. But again, we're 13 issues deep. It's time for a change. I have no qualms about that. And I even said as much back in New Mutants number 12, an issue I generally was interested in and said it was the best of at the time. I would say this gives it a run for its money. It's time for a change on New Mutants. And I think it's definitely going to be for the better, although this stands on its own pretty successfully as a Cypher-focused, Cypher-central issue of Ten of Swords. So next up, we've got Cable number 5. Now, I read the Krakoan as reading Vracosa, and I have no idea what that means yet, having not read Cable number 5 yet. So it's possible I am missing something. There have been times where my Krakoan is a little spotty, but Vracosa is coming next. So I'm curious to see what that'll mean, and definitely to dig into Cable as we head back towards Sword with Captain Commander himself and Mama Jean Grey. So thanks everybody for listening. I would love to hear your theories and ideas down in the comments below. Again, if you like Krakin and Krakoa here and like engaging with X-Men in this way, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing, and checking out Comic Book Herald everywhere else I am doing work and publishing articles, of course, on comicbookherald.com. You can support the site via patreon.com/comicbookherald, where I have recently decided that via listener and reader request that these Krakin and Krakoa episodes will be released as podcast. Not exclusively necessarily, but all of them will be available on the Patreon. Okay, that's the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to make all these Krakin and Krakoa episodes available via podcast, via Patreon. They will not necessarily be published to the live Comic Book Herald Best Comics Ever podcast feed, simply due to storage issues, and I don't want to have to pay more to upgrade. It's really what it boils down to. So thanks everybody who supports the site, who allows me to get the storage that I do have and be able to afford that over again on Patreon. Ron Paul Kirkley, Jesse W., Professor Pride, Steve Brennan, Cole Weathers, Martin Lopez, Chris Isidro, Brett Bowser, and Professor X3769. Your mysterious benefactors tier support on the Patreon is greatly appreciated. Thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.